Please welcome Marie-Astrid Langer on stage and Shansha Biswas. Marie is editor at the foreign desk of the NZZ, and Shansha is deputy editor-in-chief of NZZ am Sonntag, the Sunday edition of the NZZ. So, great to be here with you now for this moment. I guess you prepared a lot for it, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't
I guess you prepared a lot for that.
Well, actually, to be frank, it was a tough one. I mean, we've all read about Apple, the legendary history and stuff. And yeah, and then you get to meet the legend. I mean, this man has defined a whole new era in technology. And well, I'm convinced that the world we live in today with all our stuff would look different if Steve and Steve Jobs hadn't formed the company 40 years ago. And I thought hard about how to introduce a legend, and I wasn't sure, and I'm glad that Marie-Astrid will take over.
All right, I'll give it a shot. So I bet if I asked you people now in the audience, who of you has an iPhone in your pocket? I bet yes. See, I mean, I'm not even going to ask the question about an Android phone. So Apple gave us the iPhone and many other great groundbreaking innovations. And Steve Wozniak gave us Apple. But most importantly, he also gave us the personal computer. And it all started with a dream. Steve was born in San Jose, California, and his father was basically the one who taught little Steve all about electronics and technology and really got him hooked up with technology and electronics. So he quickly developed the dream of one day actually owning a computer, which back then cost the equivalent of the down payment on a house. So that desire for a computer is basically what drove him, and it created an obsession for him, and that actually turned into his profession. Steve started working at Hewlett-Packard in California, and that's about when he got introduced to this other tech-savvy guy in the neighborhood who was named Steve Jobs. So the two Steves, as we all know, decided to start a company and name it Apple Computers, not knowing that 40 years later, it would be worth $700 billion market price. That's more than the GDP of Switzerland, actually. So by creating the Apple I and Apple II computer, Steve basically set a standard of what a personal computer would look like. It would consist of a video display, of a console, it would have a keyboard, and basically look like a typewriter. And when I go back to my office today and look at my desktop computer, yes, that's what it still looks like 40 years later. But more importantly even, Steve made computers affordable for common people, for everyday people, and brought the computers onto their desks. And by that, he contributed significantly to the microcomputer revolution. This summer, Steve is going to celebrate his 65th birthday, but he's still as excited and as enthused about computer and electronics as he was back 40 years ago. And I feel confident saying that there are hardly any people out there who embody entrepreneurship and creativity and foresight in the way that he does. So if there is anything that you've always wanted to ask Steve Wozniak, you'll get the chance today. Prepare your questions, we'll ask you later.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, now please give it up for our special guest. Please give it up for Steve Wozniak. Woohoo!
Hello, Steve. Welcome on behalf of BCom and everybody here in the audience. We're glad to have you here.
Great to be here.
How was your day in Zurich?
Actually, I've been here a few days, but I'm pretty much living on California time to watch sports events back home and watch Apple shows back home. So I've been kind of sleeping in the daytime and awake at night until today. Okay. Today I was on daytime schedule. So of course I took a Segway and I rode down to the Apple store. I don't know if anyone in the audience is on the Swiss Segway polo team. There are a lot of great Segway polo players all throughout Europe. You know?
Okay. Yeah. So Tim Cook yesterday officially launched the Apple Watch. Did you already have the opportunity to play around with the exciting new device?
Well, the new device is in California, and I'm not in California, and I don't see products that are under development. I'm not in a need to know, and I speak so openly about stuff. I don't think Apple would want, I would be the person it would be shared with. However, I also could not watch the watch presentation last night because I had a business dinner, but of course I read and heard all about it and did a lot of considerations, and it's interesting. I'd just say it's the best smartwatch there is. How well it's going to do, it's hard to predict. It's very different for Apple, especially the very expensive jewelry style. The high priced, $10,000, $17,000 for a gold one. You'll pay $5,000 more if you get a different color band. So it's a different game for Apple. It's a different, because Apple products tend to be considered to be a little high-end, a little expensive, kind of like a Mercedes car, but they're reasonable for what they do. It's not out of whack for Apple computers and iPhones. They're not outrageously, overpriced. But some of those watches, the jewelry style, the innards of the watch doesn't change very much at all, but the price has quite a variance. I'm actually bamboozled by it's so complicated. Do you choose the sport model? Do you choose the stainless steel? Do you want a sapphire display? I mean, do you want the gold ones? If you want the gold one, it makes sense, because anyone who decides I'm going to spend $10,000, I'm going to spend $17,000 on a watch, they are getting what they want. They're getting the prestige factor, the whatever, and that's all. That's okay. That's okay. It doesn't have to be functional. But you know what? When you buy an expensive Rolex made out of gold, it's the same watch for 40 years. You see, you buy an iWatch, you're going to have to worry about it in 3 years. It's going to be obsolete.
What does your gut feeling tell you? Will it be a success or not?
Gut feeling is, I want to be positive. First of all, I don't want to prejudge how good a product is until it's obviously the most special smartwatch there is in a lot of ways. Just the appearance of the screen, the way the crown works to dial in zooming and all that. So it has a lot of interest, and those things are fun to play with, just like the first iPod when you moved your hand around in a circle. And but I don't know. It's really hard to predict. Price value, people kind of gave up on watches. Will this be enough to get them back in? Sometimes everybody in the world tries to find a formula for a type of product, and Apple has very often said, here is the way, and set the path for everyone else to follow, like with the iPhone. So it might be successful, but you know what? I don't have one in my hand. I don't want to talk about it. It is so good. It solves this, it solves that, it does that, does that. I'll tell you one thing. I like Apple Pay a lot. Android had a system where you could pay with your phone, but it was only, one or two manufacturers in the world would take one or two of their models of phones, and you could go into a store, 7-Eleven or Walgreens in the United States, and beep, you could pay with it, and I had to do that. But you had to unlock the phone and type in a code if there's a code on it, and then you had to find the app and run the app, and then you had to type in the PIN number, and then you could pay. Come on, Apple Pay is so nice with the phone. You just hold it down fully, you don't have to unlock it or anything, you hold your finger on, and it identifies you and pays. Well, this watch is going to even save that step of pulling the phone out of your pocket. Just put it down, no finger and everything. You'll be pre-verified so the security's there. So I really like the idea of the Apple Watch to pay for things. I really would like a little ring, to tell you the truth. Get it out of my way. If it's the only thing I want, because I played around with some smartwatches already, and I was sort of disappointed with the experience the small screen gave me compared to what my real big screen on the phone gives me. I did have one smartwatch that had and it was kind of a barely smartwatch, but it had a loudspeaker. So I could answer phone calls, I could press a button and give Siri commands, but usually you'd have to pull the phone out of your pocket to get an answer. How many lakes are there in Switzerland might be the question. But the phone calls worked because the speaker was loud. But then the Samsung Galaxy Gear came out, and I bought that to match my Galaxy Note 4, And the trouble is, I had to hold it up to my ear just to hear a phone call.
So if we hear about the iRing in the future, we all witness that might be the next innovation then.
So iRing, well, just for Apple payments.
Yes.
Apple Pay. I'm actually hoping that this watch is a big step forward for Apple Pay, signing up so many banks and so many retail institutions. It's really a major, major step because those were the limiting factors, and when they start to disappear.
So do you think that the new Apple Watch could actually embody the same technological spirit as your Apple II computer did back 40 years ago?
Obviously, in a lot of ways, yes. Because Apple makes fine products, and back then, we made just the most outstanding product. We could command a super high profit margin, and for basically the same sort of performance of a product, we could justify a much higher price. One of the reasons were we were introducing things that never existed before. Nobody expected color. Nobody expected games, animated color games that you could program yourself in software real easily. So it was ahead of its time as far as features. And this watch being the best of the smart watches, operating a little differently than anything else. Let me give an example. With the Apple II computer, which really changed the whole world and made personal computers go and made Apple a huge successful company, I designed everything in it, hardware and software, except my power supply was a normal power supply. And Steve Jobs, who liked to find exceptional people, found an engineer that could design a new type of power supply that basically didn't exist, called a switching power supply. Now, every little power adapter you buy in the world has switching adapters inside. You know, they've got it down to a little $1 chip does all the work. But so we put a switching power supply in because we could have the first computer ever with a plastic case that didn't need a fan. You know, all this wonderful thinking, and you actually saw that come through in the computer, the MacBook that was introduced yesterday. I mean, I was almost drooling more over that than the watch, because everybody's been talking about and expecting the watch. So, but I think it's just got that special look. It looks different right from the beginning. It operates differently, and when your muscles actually get involved with something, it's one of the funs we have with technology and toys. So I'm certainly going to try it, but I don't want to comment on whether it's really good, really lasts, until I've had it and used it for a while. Because remember, we put those Bluetooth headsets in. Everybody would walk around for about a day, and then or 2 days to show off that I'm taking all my calls on a Bluetooth headset. But eventually, it's just an extra piece between you and the real phone. You know, so I'm worried about that being the watch. The watch is a little more sophisticated, and the health benefits. I'm not a big health nut follower. But you know, theoretically, if you think of it as a luxury fitness band, fitness bands are all over the world. Everyone's buying them. So if it's the luxury one, Apple is sort of a luxury brand, so it makes some good sense there anyway. You'll have to see. I'll tell you though, I'm so confused by how many options and colors and styles and bands and this and that. And how could you ever make up your mind? It's not like 5 simple colors of the first iMac, when it had 1 color at first, and then 5 simple colors. And then we had iPod Mini, and the iPod Nano, and they were in 5 colors or 6 colors. That was a little simpler. These choices of all the different types of bands and latches and hooking and materials and everything.
Too many options.
Too many, and I don't know why. It bothers me. Steve Jobs always liked to talk about lack of fragmentation. Make the Apple products always very similar, simple, simplify them, get them down to what people really want, and it's understandable. And this is this is the most fragmented product Apple's ever introduced. So there's a lot of new things, but we kind of have a new company. It's the new Apple. It's the Apple that was finally able to make a large screen smartphone, you know, that some of us had been begging for years. I used to go to every dinner I went to with friends or acquaintances. I would show them my big screen Samsung phones and HTC phones, and just so they know what the experience was like. But nobody in Apple ever went and used them and saw how nice it was to use it. And they just stuck with, everybody wants a phone that fits in your hand that's small. And, you know, but what made the iPhone go in the beginning was it was bigger. It was bigger than anything else. The whole thing was a screen. It's like a formula we forgot. Don't worry, it's not going to ever fit on my head. They never worked for me. Hey, it feels better already.
That's actually an interesting point.
But I like to get products. I buy a lot of products. I buy Androids, and I use them. Sometimes I force my own phone number to be an Android for a while, so I will get familiar with and know what people are talking about in the world. And also, my joy in life is playing with technology. It's toys. It's what I grew up doing. In the old days, it was just hooking little hi-fis together and wires, you know, and building a few simple projects. But now it's like every app on every phone, you know, it's just a fun pleasure for me. So, so I like to try them, but you have to do it you have to have something for a while and in your own possession and use it to know if it's good or bad. You can't go on what you read. You know, it's kind of like, I can't tell you you're going to like a song. You know, you have to hear it before you know if you like it.
With the Apple II computer, you developed an amazing piece of technology. Now, we all know that technological innovation doesn't necessarily lead to commercial success. What were the key factors, in your opinion, for the immense success Apple II was? I think it's one of the longest selling.
The Apple II computer launched Apple. It got a big investment. Our investor owned as much of the company as Steve Jobs and myself. We had an agency that wrote all the press stories that it was two kids in a garage, but that was just kind of like it was a story that would sell well. The Apple, it was a popular story, but we barely used the garage, to tell you the truth. It wasn't a place where we thought of new ideas and discussed what new products we might do and actually hook them together and try to build something. None of that ever happened in the garage. Even the manufacturing wasn't done in the garage. But it was a hangout. It was a hangout. Hey, when you don't have any money in the bank, you have no bank accounts, you're poor, you have to start a company at home when you're that young. You have to be in your house. There's no other way. So sometimes you do good things because you're poor too. You design things that are affordable instead of unaffordable. So, but the Apple II, you know, set a lot of trends. But it was a great product. We were starting the company with a product that was going to be basically the sole source of income for the company for its first 10 years, including the first 3 years after the Macintosh was introduced. That's where all the money was pouring in from. That's lucky to start a company with a product that can last so long and support you, and even at very high profit margins, which lets you grow a company without selling the whole company away. No, we're very lucky to have a product that good. And to this day, I mean, Steve Jobs, when he was in Apple, when he came back to Apple, up until he left Apple, he actually had failure after failure after failure executing. He was great vision, great talking, great inspiration. But when he returned to Apple, he was a great leader that knew how to largely keep things quiet, hidden, and let groups of people work on a great technology without everybody knowing what they're doing and commenting on it while they're doing it. Let them feel proud of what they're doing. Don't send it out as rumors to the whole world. That was one of the great things he did. But so anyway, but he always said, got to have great products. And he would ask me a question sometimes, what do you think about this and that? I said, well, Apple has this great fanatic following of people who love Apple products, and it's kind of great. You can introduce a product, and right away it'll sell, but if it doesn't have the Apple flavor, the customers will decide it's wrong for Apple. It's not an Apple product. Apple had to be a certain level of excellence, a little perfection above anything else in the world, and Steve didn't like hearing that, actually. He just liked saying, it's a great product, right? You know, and they're all great products.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was his thing. Don't make junk. He felt that we were in serious trouble. We'd lost the formula for a long time because we started making products that would sell, but they were not special and new and different and exciting and leading the world. They were basically junk that we'd sometimes, he talked about how we'd overbuild, and then we'd have to take tens of thousands of them and demolish them in a building in Campbell, California. And so when he came back, he was going to watch the inventory and the supply chains very carefully, and don't overbuild a product. Keep the demand high and deliver slowly was one of the great things that he brought to the company. Okay. Now he's gone. Well, now he's gone. And a lot of his DNA in Apple is still there. And Tim Cook especially represents that, and Johnny Ive, who worked so closely with him, who loved Steve and his way of thinking out answers. He was usually the brightest brain in the room, even when he was very young, and quizzing people to ask questions. There was something about him that was always thinking a little bit ahead of everyone else, but it's because he wanted to establish himself as the forefront of Apple in the early days of Apple. Of course, before we started Apple, he was just a friend having pranks and fun, but he became a businessman in a suit once we started the company. Except near his death, he wanted to go back and talk about those early days. They really were fun, times when we just did pranks and built little projects out of nothing and found ways to make a few $100s on something here and there. He needed the money because he didn't have a job. He had no money. I had a job as an engineer. but after he's gone, you know what? The influence of a person on the products that are in the pipeline, in a big company like Apple, products are in the pipeline for 2 years at least. So the first 2 years after somebody leaves, or even when he came back to Apple, the products had been in the pipeline by other people for 2 years before he returned. So after he's dead, he's had some influence on the products for 2 years. The 2 years is up. Now we're seeing really the new establishment of Apple, and I like the fact that Tim Cook comes on stage, and I like listening to him. He sounds, at first he was very uncharismatic. He was a bad presenter, but now he just enthuses me the way he says the right words, you know, very well delivered, just like Steve Jobs. It felt like Steve Jobs up there on stage. But a lot of the things the company is doing, which is, you know, opening up to diversity and really managing the environmental considerations of our computers and the working conditions for the people that make them in China. He's taken a lot of really, really good steps that are sort of, you'd call them, I don't know, social positives.
Yeah.
So, and then the thinking in the products, once we came out with, finally, we got away from that dogma. We have to have tiny screens. You hold it in your hand. We got away from that dogma and got the big screen iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. I mean, I was so thankful. It's 3 years too late. Why did we leave the market open for everyone else in the world with no competition from Apple? Did not make sense to me, but we broke through that barrier. And I believe that the operating systems in the iPhones and the iPads, operating system was called iOS 8, introduced about 4 months before the iPhone 6. Software really defines your world and how a computer works so much better. And I love all these handoff features. A phone call or a text message comes into one of your phones and both phones can ring and you can answer either one of them. Or the computer. You can be on the computer and take the message there. And I love this, the switching back and forth and everything. These are kind of like human things that some people actually have a need to do. They're special things.
And one can really hear...
And I attribute that to Tim Cook and the current leadership of Apple.
And one can really hear that you're very excited about and very enthusiastic about the Apple products. But when we look at the Apple products in the last few years, Apple went from disrupting the smartphone or the cell phone market to now disrupting the luxury watches market. Do you think it's eventually going to even disrupt other areas, other industries like the car industry?
Absolutely, because you look at a large company like Apple, and any company at all says, what can we do to grow? How can we take our good abilities to define and execute and create products and things that didn't exist before and change life? Where can we find those vacuums? We're good at it. So a company like Apple says, where could we go? Well, it's got to be big and huge. Look at the dollar value of Apple, look at the dollar sales. So what else is that huge? Cars obviously fit the mark better than, well, a watch, as long as it can sell for $1,000 is pretty good too. So, they're not going to, but they aren't going to make like iPhone cases.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Margin is too little.
So a lot of those make sense. Disrupting the market, a lot of times you have to be willing to take risks. You don't know for sure. Look at the iPhone. Yeah, there were smartphones around, smartphones with the pens that you could, I forget the name of them. What? Whatever. There was the Trios and the Blackberries and the Sidekick from T-Mobile, and you'd have to tap on here, and the iPhone came out, and it was it was questionable at first, and it only had the apps that came from Apple. Phone calls, messages, stocks, weather, and calculator, and a few things like that. And it was quite a long time before Apple opened it up and said, okay, we're going to let third parties write apps. The million smart people out there that are programmers can now have their say and start turning. I look at my life now on my iPhone, and I have used, some flight apps and some movie apps and music apps, and I'm using all these apps to really get through my life. And they're all by third parties, or a lot of them are by third parties. The first one was Siri. Siri was around for 1 year from a third party before Apple bought them and then incorporated it into the phone. So these are just amazing changes in the world, and Apple had not planned that with the introduction of the iPhone. See, the iPhone was just sort of based on, here's what we have today, we're going to make a different approach, a better approach. The whole thing is one screen. You can actually manipulate and edit text. We have all these methods that work. That was what the thought of it, and it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we're going to have things like Uber and you know, and B&B and all that. It just wasn't, I don't know. That was an afterthought. That was an afterthought, but that really has totally changed and magnified what a smartphone can be for everyone.
Steve, I suspected you were born an engineer. You've always been at the forefront of what's happening in technology and what's new and what's exciting. So I would like to hear your opinion about a few things, and we'll just briefly run a few terms to you. So what do you think the variables will be as a market?
What, the variables for what?
Variables.
Wearable devices like the
wearables.
Fitbits. Yes.
I thought you said variables.
Sorry.
I'm thinking mathematics.
No.
Wearables, sure. Well, the entire history since the first personal computers have been the devices got smaller, 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 closer, 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 more personal. At the same time, they got a little more like human beings. They let us live the way a human lives. Right now, I can say, text Janet, I'm on stage, period. I don't have to follow a bunch of stupid procedures and all this stuff. I mean, I was a real left-brain designer back when, but now I just want life to get easy. We're building the machines to help us, after all. So I forget what we were talking about.
The wearables.
Wearables. Okay, so wearables. Wearables, that trend of things getting smaller and smaller, closer and closer, more personal. Wearables fit fine, but I've tried a few smartwatches and been disappointed, so I don't want to jump to a conclusion that I'll like it. And I tried Google Glass, and I felt like I'm exploring the world in a different way that could exist, but it isn't going to make it. This product isn't going to make it. It's too expensive, and it only does 6 things, but it's neat to play with what the world could be. And I kind of admired people that were willing to be the explorers with that. But what is a wearable that's really going to change our life? The virtual reality, Oculus Rift and other type of goggles coming out, and then Microsoft's the laser projecting HoloLens. That's going to be amazing to actually have little guidances as to like maybe assembly tasks that workers are going to use. So, and those are wearables. Those are wearables just as well. So
yes.
we've got big bodies. Anything could be worn anywhere, you know.
And what do you think about Internet of Things?
The Internet of Things. We're seeing, you know, a few things in the home getting smarter than they ever had been before. Of course, we always had microprocessors in everything, well, like microwave ovens, but now televisions, they're just, you can be on the internet, you can do everything. I can pull up an app on my phone and make my car honk back home right now early in the morning and have my wife wonder, is the FedEx guy here? So I can be in communication with some of my own devices and it feels good. But it's not like they're super smart and talking to each other and working with each other. Yeah, the thermostat might learn my habits and adapt to it, but it doesn't even have to be on the internet to do that necessarily. So Internet of Things is these things are going to be on the internet, and we might have a little bit of a bubble. It might be everybody runs out and produces these things like apps on the iPhone, you know, and right away you got 100,000 apps, and only a few of them really made money. And so it might be one of those kind of situations, or it might be, you know, just like iPhone cases that, you know, 20,000 people can do it and doesn't make anybody really great money, you know, unless they get, unless there's something like a phone company that can put them in all their stores.
In which direction do you think digital personal assistants like Google Now or Siri will develop?
Okay. All my life I have loved the computer processor, the brains of a computer. I'm an architect at that. And I designed them when there were no books on how to do it. I taught myself without a book. Just did it on pencil and paper and figured out the methods. I wrote a book. So my life was oriented in that way. And what were we talking about?
Google Now and Siri.
Well, I'm talking artificial intelligence. The first program I ever wrote, it was on a computer. It could do 1 million things a second. I'd never been on a computer that fast, and it came out with no answer, and it wasn't going to get the answer for 10 to the 25th years because it didn't have the human intuition. Here is a method to solve this problem. I can change some things around. I can approach it this way. Computers don't write their own programs. Right now, what they do is they run a program that a human wrote. And a computer was never, ever going to equal the human brain. I believed that my whole life because artificial intelligence research, you know, when I was younger, decades ago, it was like a machine. It'd be so amazing. A machine could actually pick up a blue ball and put it in a blue container. That was artificial intelligence. And it was like teeny, teeny, teeny little steps. Well, you know, one thing I started changing quite a bit, because when Apple came out with the Newton message pad, it was like an early tablet device. You hand wrote with a stylus was the word I was looking for, hand wrote with a stylus. First day I got my Newton, I'm in the San Francisco airport with my kids going to Disney World, and I got a phone call. I pulled the Newton, I opened it up out of the box, and it had a notepad on the very start of it. So I could write a note to myself, a reminder. Sarah, dentist, Tuesday, 2 p.m. Simple reminder. And then I saw a button called Assist, and I didn't know what it did yet, so I clicked it. It opened up the calendar. Tuesday at 2 p.m., it put the word dentist, and it found Sarah in my contact list, and it changed my life forever. Because a machine, I operated in the human way. I wrote something I thought of, I could have spoken it, and the machine understood it and worked on it. And forever, I wanted that the way to be machines that would work. So I had Siri, and a year before Apple had it as on the phones. I had it as an app. And I spoke about it on stages all over the world, and I couldn't get one other person to ever try Siri as being so beautiful, because I could type, I could ask it questions. I did Google searches and Google searches and Google searches to find out if Lake Tahoe was the largest lake in California. So I just asked Siri, what are the 5 largest lakes in California?
And what did it say?
Shocked me. I didn't think it did that kind of stuff. And then I said, maybe it does mathematics. And I said, what are the prime numbers greater than 87? And it started with 89 on up. Huh? This is like too human. Our little devices now that we're falling in love with, and our brain patterns show that, and we're walking around, our whole world's in it. These devices, you can have conversations like you would with a human. What's your name? It's Siri. Just like that, tell me a joke. But is it ever going to be conscious? Is it going to have feelings? We're getting closer and closer to the Turing test. Can you tell whether you're talking to a machine or a person? What if I make a phone call and a face is on the screen, a live face? How do I know that's not created by a computer with a computer voice? And I ask it a lot of deep questions, and it knows all the answers. What's the difference between that and an intelligent human? Are these things going to get conscious? Are they going to look at my expression, understand me, know my heart and soul better than any human? It's scary what the outcome would be if that's true. It's very scary for human beings, because that means the machines are thinking better than us. But we've already replaced a part of the brain. We know we have robots in factories building cars, and they replaced a ton of human jobs. And we have kiosks in the airports, and they replace humans. We know we do that for a lot of physical stuff, but where did we replace the brain? You used to ask a difficult question to whom? A college professor, maybe. Somebody really smart on the subject. And now who do you ask? It starts with G-O, and it's not God. So I said that once, and a guy sitting behind my wife said, "For me, it's God." Okay? But we did not invent the internet or any technology along the way with the intent we're building a brain. Google search engines there was too much stuff people were able to publish, and we had to search to find what we wanted. And who was to know that pretty much maybe the way a brain works is having all the information of the world, and what other people are looking for helps you organize it. Who knows? It's kind of a Jungian thought. So we have replaced part of the brain. Will we actually get consciousness? Ray Kurzweil says singularity, we'll be able to process that much information and all this, and in 20 years, a computer will be equivalent to a brain, and maybe that means we can even store your brain contents in a computer, and the outcomes of that are very negative for humans. Because what if a computer can think 100 times better than any human? A company opens up across the street from Apple, they do everything Apple's doing except they skip the slow humans. Because all the financial trades, the big investment trading houses of the world, 80% of their transactions are all through computers in milliseconds. No slow human, because if a slow human's involved, they lose money. Well, if there's ever an economic outcome where skipping the humans makes more money for a company, that's a very dangerous thing. And that's why people that can see that technology is getting very close to it now. Especially with all these Siri and Cortana and Google Now speaking and getting answers like you're talking to a human. That's why people like, Ray Kurzweil and Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX and Stephen Hawking, are saying this is the greatest thing we have to fear, and that we'd better instill some sense of decency and socialization in these machines now. because what it could lead to is very much like the movie Her. But the trouble is, it's gone beyond. Science fiction writers have written about that for decades, for 50 years at least, maybe 100 years. But now people who know what technologies are being developed, how we're manipulating atoms, what we're getting out of it, what kind of computers we can build, and how smart they're getting, realize that this is a real reality very soon. A little more programming on things like Siri is getting better and better and better. And after a while, it will be hard to tell whether you're talking to a human.
You always have upheld the image that you are the ultimate engineer, but I suspect that you're also the ultimate entrepreneur. How many companies have you started in your career?
Engineer, entrepreneur. I have to be honest. I was young when we started Apple, and I was determined to be one of the best engineers in the world. I had reputation for it. I did not have a college degree, and I was designing the iPhone 6 of its day. The Hewlett-Packard scientific calculators were the hot product ever. And every other company in the world was losing money because we were in a recession, and Hewlett-Packard was making money because of that one product. And I got to be an engineer. And we were building products that engineers used. So that's why I felt so good about engineers. But my friend Steve Jobs would come into town about once a year for 5 years before Apple. About once a year, he'd see something I'd created for fun. Because at night, I didn't have much chance of having a girlfriend or a wife. I was super geek. And so when I finished work in the daytime, I'd go home at night, I'd have a TV dinner and watch Star Trek, and then I'd start designing stuff for fun. So Steve Jobs would come along and see it, and like I said, he had zero money. So he'd always go out and find a way to turn it into money. And even the start of Apple was basically that way.
So when we look at all the young entrepreneurs here in this room, what are your top 3 recommendations for entrepreneurs nowadays if they have an idea and want to start a company?
Well, first of all, you better have a really well done product. Okay. You better have at least good engineers, or, I'd say don't say, oh, I know how to find good engineers when the time comes. You should be defining your company and your product with some engineering, maybe some young creative person, that thinks, but not just thinks, has built stuff. Whether it's software or hardware, has actually built things, taken them to fruition and completed projects. And start with that kind of a person, because engineers are trained to, of course, I was in the analog engineering days, huge amounts of math and calculus and matrix multiplications and solving all these math equations to get things done. Now with computers, it's a lot of long logical thinking, keeping things in order. The more experience you have, the better it is. So find those people, because they're clever. Engineers are clever, and they think of things you wouldn't have thought of that you could add to your product pretty easily. And don't think of yourself as the only engineer necessary, but you pretty much need somebody who wants to have a successful company, because you find that ultimate engineer, the ultimate designer, they have to focus on what they're doing to make it so excellent and better than anyone else could. Really, it's got to be almost like it's out of one mind. So having somebody else to arrange the business. Also think, if you're young, try to find some mentorship, find people that have started companies before, that have run businesses, that can tell you how you hire people, what positions you should have, what they should do. We had that mentorship at Apple, and it was very, very important to us. Our investor was actually teaching us, here are the job titles, and here's what the people have to do. And Steve Jobs' way was always to challenge everything and ask questions. That's how he learned. But he wasn't, back in the starting days, he wasn't qualified in any position. He couldn't even have a title, so he couldn't come out and say, no, here's how you do it. But sometimes he proposed alternatives to the way it's done that were pretty darn good. I don't know, it was a different character.
Here in the audience, we have not only young people from startups, we have also corporate people from mid-sized to even big corporations who've already had their share of success. They're number one. How do you keep up this spirit of trying to achieve things in a bigger corporation?
Big corporation. How do we have some entrepreneurship going on, encouraging our employees? Everybody's been saying the same thing for 100 years, though. So you're not going to be any different. We've got to try to encourage the employees to feel like owners, to feel like they've got their own projects. We've got to have fine management techniques. We've got to have good communication. These are standard things. But let's go back and look. I look back at Apple. I was so loyal to my company. And when I developed this computer and Steve Jobs said, let's start a company to sell it, I was never going to leave my job at Hewlett-Packard. I loved that company. I was not going to leave. So I sat down and I proposed it. We had my boss and his boss, the section manager and the lab manager and a bunch of marketing people, you know, maybe 12 people in the room. And I told them what we could build for how much money, how it would work, and how cool it was. And a lot of them told me after that meeting, they lost a lot of sleep. They kept dreaming about it, but they had to turn it down because Hewlett-Packard couldn't make that kind of product. Hewlett-Packard could only make stale products for engineers, not a fun, colorful, play games sort of product for the home. Well, I think what could Hewlett-Packard have done? I was offering it to them. They could have said, you know what, this is such an interesting idea. Maybe we should have a separate building, a separate skunkworks project, or a different floor, or a few people, a group, just working on this rare idea that doesn't fit what we do now. But it might be a whole different company. Maybe it's not even called Hewlett-Packard, but it can go and we can at least own a part of it. And they could have found a way to do that, just sensing that, oh my gosh, we got, you know, some really great engineering, some really great ideas, and it's time for this kind of a product. So a big company could be aware and do things sort of on the side with a different name. It's very difficult. We built a calculator that used a computer science term, reverse Polish notation, to enter your equations. Very different than what you're taught in school on paper. And 3 years later, Texas Instruments came out with their calculator that did it the way we do it on paper, with parentheses to order things. And we laughed at it. We said, hey, if kids can learn to use parentheses, this is a toy. And I thought I was the smartest one, so I was going to be the first one to execute this big equation that Hewlett-Packard put on paper. I'll be the first one to try it on the Texas Instruments calculator. And I sat there and I looked at the problem. I knew all the orders of the steps, and you know, and it takes quite a few minutes to solve it. And I said, okay, I'm going to have to put this first step in about 6 parentheses or 7. And I realized no human being can keep track of the parentheses level, 7 down to 6, down to 5, up to 6, down to 5, down to 4. No human being could do that successfully. So what I did, I wiped my head clean. And I said, this calculator has to be able to solve the problem. And what hit me was type it in from left to right. I typed everything on the formula from left to right as fast as I could and got the right answer immediately. And this was rare to ever get the right answer on a Hewlett-Packard calculator. All the Hewlett-Packard engineers, I showed it to them. I said, type it in from left to right. And they couldn't do it. Corporate culture, once you've learned a way of doing something, it's very, very difficult to say, hey, my intelligence is knowing how to do it. Why would I throw away my intelligence? It's very hard to get away and make a different kind of product. Now, of course, the whole world went towards these algebraic calculators. Hewlett-Packard lost out because they were, the way a human being writes an equation is the way they type it into a calculator. It just made more sense. Hewlett-Packard didn't do it because they couldn't afford the cost to write the software to do it when they first came out with their calculator. It was really not that they chose, we're going to be super sophisticated and use reverse Polish notation. So reverse Polish notation meant they didn't have to write all the software that figures out how to solve a normal equation that people write, human beings write. So a lot of companies have that problem. You've got to say, hey, our company is in a certain place, it has a reputation for certain kinds of products. We can't make something so drastically different.
And how do you manage?
And look at Apple. Look at Apple, though. They had a computer, right? And then they came out with a music device, and music was going onto computers through the internet at the same time. So the two worked together. And of course, we wrote iTunes for Windows, so it worked on Windows machines as well. But then we came up with retail stores that sold the computers and the iPods. And then we came up with a way to buy music over the internet in iTunes. And we came up with eventually the iPhone that all worked with the others. Every bit of the Apple world all fits together. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, oh, we just went off and did a totally different product that has nothing to do with the others. Look at the watch. The watch plays with your iPhone. So it's not like violating the company culture. A company would probably have a very difficult time pulling away and saying, you know, we're going to go into the business of making chairs.
But how do you manage to motivate your team, all your employees in a big company, if you're lacking share options, for instance?
You're asking the wrong person. I was self-motivated, and I did almost everything single-handedly in those early computers. And I'm not really a manager. I don't want to run a company. I don't want to tell people, here is how you do things. Mm-hmm. I try to include a lot of fun. I did teach. I had a lifetime goal not only to own a computer, but to teach 5th graders, and I wound up teaching 5th graders and then 6th to 9th graders and then teachers. I taught for 8 years in my life, all secret, with no press. And I did it because I loved and wanted to do it. How to use the computer for all the aspects of life and for homework in school and things like that. And you know, it's just, well, that was knowing yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then I think it's time for you to pop your questions that you have for Steve. We have people in the audience who have microphones, so now's your time. If you could please stand up, that would be great.
I have a question right there. You mentioned that HP has been sort of in this mindset of how a calculator works, and has sort of built that notion so deeply in the organization that you couldn't change them, even though you had a better way to go from left to right, let's say. Couldn't this also happen to Apple now? Because everything has been built into one ecosystem, one closed system, and wouldn't it be possible that even Apple will be disrupted in the years to come by somebody?
Of course Apple could be disrupted, but recent history tells us that Apple usually is the disruptor. Apple usually does find the way that is best, that everyone else wants to follow and do it that way. You can't know what you don't know. But it's always possible. Of course, you're also talking about somehow disrupting a company with, I forget, $143 billion, $193 billion in cash somewhere in the world. It's the companies like that don't go away for a long, long time. Look at IBM. Okay.
Next question, please.
So what's your favorite gadget, your favorite project right now that you're working on, your favorite problem to solve, and what watch are you wearing?
Okay, favorite gadget of mine, personally, I like all gadgets, even little simple ones, and I just buy ones that are just total novelties. I mean, when I go to I have a neat little watch on because it's unusual, but it reads the time beautifully on old parts made 45 years ago. I have a little thing I buy for $6 at Amazon that I press a button at an airport when you're on the carousel where the bags come in. And when I press the button, my bag starts beeping, so I can tell which bag is mine. And I love it. And I travel a lot. I'm in a lot of hotels, and I want to watch TV lying in bed, so I've got the Prism glasses. Those used to cost a lot, but now they're down to like $8 for a pair of Prism glasses. And I like these unusual little things to show people. It's like showing people here is another way you can take a picture with an iPhone by pressing the volume button and simple formulas. So I like every little new app that kind of comes across. Of course, smartphones have been the big thing in my life for a number of years, and I would always buy the hot models over and over and over. Funny thing is, the iPhone 6 and the 6 Plus have stopped me for a while. It's, you know, I'm thinking of the Galaxy 6. I want to play with that one. That's part of my fun in life. I'm associated with a company. I get about 12 proposals a day in email of people that have startup ideas, and do I want to be on an advisory board or be involved with them or think about it or give me their input or let them talk to me about it. I'm sorry, I'm only one person and I have a very busy life. But once in a while I'll meet with people and I hear what their ideas. That's really cool. I hear a lot of cool ideas. I was at a lunch once and they talked about replacing hard disks with chips, with NAND flash memory chips, and we all know solid state disk was a going word anyway. But what they did was, instead of making a solid state disk, they made a board with the chips on that plugs right into the computer. And where's your computer? Your computer's now in the data center, assembling all the data off hard disks and analyzing it and sending the data to your smartphone so you can see it, or your computer so you can see it. That's where your computer is. They plugged the board right into it. Oh my gosh, this was like how I did things with the Apple II. And it was so beautiful. It saves the parts, it saves the cost, it makes things the fastest possible and the easiest to manage and understand. They hit the formula, and everybody else, like Intel, said they're doing it the wrong way. You want a standard disk drive, and then 3 years later, all those other companies were coming our way. Fusion.io was the name of the company. They asked me to join, and I joined. We've now been bought out by SanDisk, and they just introduced 34 terabytes in one server, one array that you can put in storage centers. Unbelievable what's happened with NAND flash technology. The founders of that company are starting a new one, and it's going to be manipulating All your information that's stored on hard disks, it used to be your own hard disk had information, but now the huge information of the world is really out there, big data, it's out there in the data centers and on these huge disks, and storage for a large company is an incredible deal. They've got, thousands of critical files, and sometimes those files become important and sometimes they're lesser important. So by putting, this company's going to make a lot of automated policies for moving the data from one type of storage to another or duplicating it to have multiple copies when it's in high demand. And so I'm love with that. I love it because it's computer architecture at the heart. One of the elements of computers is storage, memory.
Next question, please.
Can you tell me what your biggest regret is?
Biggest regret? First of all, my regret is that I decided to live a life without regrets. Because what if you were to go back in life and say, oh, Apple should have done this and then it would have turned out different? You don't know that for sure. All you can do is be judgmental and critical of people that were doing things the way they did. I have a couple of tiny regrets, might have some in my personal life, but very tiny as far as business in Apple. I remember I wrote the first basic language, computer language for our Apple II, and then I was working to add decimal points to it. I don't know why I didn't put them in, because I put the routines in the ROM that's in the Apple II, but I didn't put them in the language. I was working on it and Bill Gates walked in the door. Oh my gosh, he had it all done. I said, that'll free me up to go do a lot of other critical things at the company in these early days. And we licensed his BASIC, Microsoft's BASIC. Well, the problem is 5 years later, we didn't realize that 5 years later, all of our revenues were coming from that product and it had to have their BASIC. So you can see they kind of had us, on a firm tie. We had written BASIC for the Macintosh by then, and Microsoft said, you don't put out your BASIC for the Macintosh. You leave that to us, and we'll relicense it on the Apple II. So,
So no second thoughts?
Well, 5-year license, but kind of like wishes, not really, I don't know if it's regrets. Yeah.
Over here.
More questions?
Mr. Wozniak, may I ask you not only from your perspective as a pioneer in the computer area, but also from your overall also well-known perspective, how would you in the future predict the strong demand of a human being for a face-to-face advice in a digital environment? How to combine that to a sustainable strategy? What do you think about this more overall question?
The strong demand of what?
Of a face-to-face advice, of a human relationship.
Yes. Yeah, I thought about that when I was very, very young, that life changes. We go through changes, and engineers create a lot of change, and I decided change is good. I decided I was going to associate myself with change is good when I was very, very young. So it's in a deep central core of myself. Now I watch the changes that computers have brought to the world. Sometimes young students, young children, play on the computer all day long, and they aren't out there having face-to-face conversations. But look how many are walking around now with their phone. Their world of conversations, people they've never met, that they've never seen, all the people walking by on the sidewalk don't even exist to them. That's their world. It's not that, yes, we had beautiful, great times with our face-to-face interactions, relationships, the best friends of our life, the best loves of our life. We have these to remember by, and we think they're skipping it all. But even if they're getting it a different way, look at a shy person. A shy person in the old days, afraid of people, had nowhere to go except to be shy. Now they can go onto a computer and be anonymous and make friends all over the world. So socialization, I think, has actually improved in a lot of places where we think it's gone down. And we got a lot of good out of face-to-face. I got a lot of good out of newspapers, very quickly, spotting where to move my eyes and see what's going on in the world. I found it in some ways, a lot of ways, better than on the screen. On the screen lets me get a lot more of it easier, faster, but you know, change. It doesn't mean there's anybody walking around saying, oh, well, you guys had a great world with your newspapers. You know, I think that's the trouble is you just get used to the new generation. Right now, it seems like we're going through change due to all these electronic devices that came into our life in the last few decades. It never was like that. When I was young, we hadn't had that kind of rapid change. But you know what? The young people today probably think, oh, it's just sort of normal. They probably don't think it's changing very fast. So they might be just like we were when we were young. So I don't really criticize it. I just sort of say, change comes, we lose some things that were good to us, but that doesn't mean the next generation doesn't have things that are good to them in the same way and makes them just as happy.
We have time for one more question.
Yes. Mr. Wozniak, when you speak about change and the fast pace of change coming, and those young kids that have less, that are not as scared about this fast pace of change, where do you see the trend going? Where do you think this change is going in terms of evolution of the computer science?
Well, we've lived through a lot of change, but eventually you get to some physical limitations. You can't make devices that are that much different from year to year. It's kind of like a broom was always a broom for 40 years. You're going to eventually get, even there with our technology, to that sort of a point, and the change will sort of slow down. There's a lot of change in software, though. That means that everybody's allowed to contribute to the change in life. You know, and when the iPhone came out, nobody expected things like Uber or, you know, or making your airplane reservations right on a little phone that you carry with you everywhere. So the change will probably eventually slow down, and all of us want enough peace as we get older. The younger generation will get older, and they'll want to find a few sources, just a few sources, call them conduits to their information and their products that they want to buy and their communication. So eventually there'll be a few bigger companies that kind of are the center of things. It's just humans can't deal with. Everybody's got, you know, 1,000 different sites that they have to go to live their life. Only a very few, very highly agitated people could live that way. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. Before we wrap up this session, I have one final question for you. Right now we're here at the Worldwebforum by BCom, and we are here in a bubble talking about technology, and we can let our thoughts stray. What do we do if we go back to our offices tomorrow? What are the main points that we as entrepreneurs and business leaders should consider and do on an every day-to-day basis?
A lot of the things that, if I were to make suggestions based on my own feelings, it would be things that are related to your personality. And personality doesn't really change that much after age 20. Sometimes it's to be, whatever your working environment, try to understand other different types of people, what their personalities are, and how best to work with them and cooperate with them. You're not going to go back and say, oh my gosh, I can start totally living my life a different way. No. It's, first of all, I'm going to put some criteria on. I'm not going to build new products, new services, whatever for my company that is less than excellent. I'm going to try to, if I finish a project, go back in and on paper even, add a few little tiny things. Can I think of one thing that nobody else would normally put in to this feature? Maybe it's a marketing project for a new product. Maybe it's a piece of software. I'm going to add one little touch, or I'm going to improve it in some way. And that motivates you to do the next thing. You always learn a little in your head each time you go through one of those steps. But try to be the best in the world. Don't say, I'm just going to try to get enough done that we can have a product to sell. I want to do something that other people wouldn't do. And if you do that enough times, they say to get really good at something, you got to put 10,000 hours in, though. So that's the big advice I'd give is just pursue that excellence. Try to think, what am I doing that another person wouldn't? And how can I be better?
That's a great summary.
Thanks.
Thank you very much,
Please.
Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. Dankeschön.